I'm gonna talk about the nature of evolution a little bit. I know I said I would only do one political post, and I did that one, but there's a few things I'd like to say. Probably because I've just had my heart broken recently by, you know, people who for years I've thought were pretty rational around politics. But let's just talk about personal evolution and the nature of evolution first, um, because I think it's important that we understand what we're. I think it's important. Thanks for the brief intermission. I think it's important that we understand what's actually happening. So, the nature of personal evolution, meaning evolving through stages of development, r- involves many things: expansion, plateaus, regressions. So it's less like a direct line and more like a upward spiral, and sometimes we slide down. And the nature of the practice and the evidence and the nature of personal evolution is the ability to take on an ever increasing number of perspectives. What that means is if we get new information, we actually have to decide whether we're going to incorporate that information into our worldview or if we're going to contract, regress, and polarize or dig in. That's the nature of personal evolution. Always will be, always has been like that. And so there's expansion, there's regressions, there's plateaus. This is all involved in personal evolution. And so what we've seen in the last year is really a mass regression because we're contracting under and if you put any organism under pressure, whether it's an animal in the cold and it huddles and shivers, or whether it's a person under financial stress or emotional stress, or they do regress, they contract down into a lower stage of development. And as a result, their responses will come from a lower center of gravity, to use the terms. And so, these stages are of increasing wholeness, from pre-rational, rational to trans-rational. If you want to really geek out at it, read Spiral Dynamics, which is a book on values, the evolution of values, leadership, and, organizational change, one could say. But what we've seen culturally, I think, in the last few years is a mass regression with the pandemic and all the pressures that have come along with that. We've seen a regression. Now, there's some things I've noticed lately, especially around politics, that have deeply concerned me. And I sort of swore off politics 2006. That's the one other stream I did about politics, which I talked about, at some point people take a bullet for the party, or they simply they twist themselves into a pretzel, justifying why it's okay when their side does a thing when they were sometimes just condemning the other side for doing the same thing. So there's just a lack of, I would call it, intellectual integrity, to be honest. But I've seen something even worse lately. And so we've talked about the nature of evolution, but there's also, like, anytime somebody looks at, the other side really is a one-dimensional view on politics anyway, which doesn't really work. The political compass, which is a 4-quadrant model, and you can just go to politicalcompass.org and take a test. That's useful also. But we could even turn that compass, those 4 quadrants on their side, and add stages of development. And I don't want to geek out too much on that stuff, but let's just say that our current model is pretty broken in terms of assessing where somebody lies in terms of how they're going to perceive the world and where they're going to react from and what's important to them and all of that. But there's something very troubling I've seen lately, and that's when faced with, and this goes with the expansion, plateau, regression concept, the very troubling pattern I've seen lately is people being unwilling to admit that they got it wrong. Or like, wow, I didn't think of it that way. Now that I have this new information, maybe I should shift my perspective. So I hate to bring him up, but if we look at people who supported Trump the first time around, which, by the way, when people told me that Trump got nominated, I thought they were joking with me because I hadn't watched the news for years. When I heard he got the nomination in November 2015, I was like, or whenever it was, July or who knows when it was, but it was, before the election. I'm like, no, you're messing with me, right? The reality TV guy? Apparently, yes. And I could understand why they would vote for him the first time. Outsider, not part of the political establishment. Yeah, disruptor, cool. Like, let's shake it up. I get it. I don't have a problem with that, right? And the nature of personal evolution, as we've said, is the ability to take on an ever increasing number of perspectives. When we're talking about that interpersonally, that means being able to speak to the other person's concern, the other person's viewpoint, even if you disagree with it, you can at least demonstrate understanding of it. To me, that's the practice in the art as well as the evidence of personal evolution. So I could understand why they voted for him the first time. What I don't understand is this whole people have gone down lately. And I don't know if you watched The Social Dilemma or not, but one of the things that struck me so much was, it's a documentary by people who helped build some of these platforms, Facebook and Google and Twitter. And they were talking about how on Twitter, fake news, actual false information, travels 6 times faster than verified real information. And so these disinformation campaigns have been just stunning. Now, I've always considered Twitter sort of a cesspool. So, like, I broadcast to it on occasion, but I never go and read it. And I've been stunned by how many people I really, really thought were critical thinkers in the last year who they send me Twitter links. I'm like, this isn't a source. Like Twitter is not a news source. Like some guy or girl posting a thing isn't a news source. It just stuns me that people don't look any deeper. They don't fact check any of their own news. And they're in this fevered, addictive state of simply repeating things or sharing them, retweeting them, whatever it is. But the thing that troubles me most is the conservatives that I thought were, they had, intellectual integrity and rigor. And here's, by the way, one of the things that Ken Wilber said years ago was that you could look at conservatives as inside and liberals as outside, meaning what explains the results in your life. And the conservative rhetoric and mythos is like, well, if like you are responsible for your results, you're responsible for your actions, whether it's a pregnancy or your economic situation. That's the conservative, mindset, generally speaking. Like you are responsible for your actions, for the results in your life, like that. And then liberals, historically speaking, have said, well, it's who it's external events, it's systemic racism, for example, all these things. Which one of them are right? Well, the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? It's a combination of those things. But what happened in the last month with conservatives and being responsible, and what happened to words matter? What happened to ideas matter? And so this selling out for a fevered base, I had a friend recently. We even had a political blog together years ago. And he said, when did you swallow a blue pill? What are you talking about? And his whole thing was that Trump was, while imperfect, uncorrupt. Like he was pure. And he told me this again last week. So I don't know what happened, but you can't claim to be a conservative and say, well, it's the media's fault. And I just don't know what's happened other than, and this is the other thing that really scared me about the Social Dilemma documentary. They said, hey, you want to buy a small election? Like small country in Africa? No problem. We can tell you how much the ad campaign will cost, essentially. And because they don't verify any of the facts. So you could just write great headlines and absolutely influence an election, which is the danger of some of these platforms. I don't have a good solution to that, but what I do know is the selling out on the right with people who I've respected for years over somebody who they thought was but after 4 years of seeing just how many lies he told, how delusional he was, how incompetent, fundamentally incompetent, just about everything, you would think that they would go, okay, well, it was great that we wanted to vote in a disruptor, but they doubled down instead. And this is exactly why I can't stand partisan politics. They take a bullet for their side or twist themselves into a pretzel, explaining how it's okay when their person does it and how it's. And I'm like, no, just admit that you were wrong. And I see this in all contexts, by the way, not just politics. There's this weird thing where you can't. People are resistant to saying, I didn't see it that way. I was wrong. I didn't know that. Now that I include that in my worldview, I have a different opinion. And I actually consider it it's not a weakness, which it seems to be. That's what people think. I don't know why they do it. Maybe they just want to be right. But it happens privately as well as publicly. And for me, it's actually a sign of esteem for yourself, of strength, of, hey, I'm not my opinions. I think it was George Bernard Shaw who said, I would never want to die for one of my beliefs. I might be wrong. Fucking A, man. And so if your view's not evolving over, and it's not that you need to switch political affiliations. I think the political game is silly. It's part of the matrix, right? It's just a way to get plugged in. But at least have some integrity and not just be exuding hypocrisy. But again, if we're talking about personal evolution, which is how I'm justifying talking about politics one more time, then you have to be willing to go, oh, what is going on with that other side? I'm not saying you have to agree with them. Lord knows. But to admit when you didn't know a thing and now that you know that thing without and I've posted things and commented and said, please consider it before you respond. And I can guarantee they didn't even have time to read what I wrote before they reacted and responded. And this is this dynamic, this polarization, this digging in without actually carefully considering a thing, or even saying, I hadn't thought about it that way. I'll come back to this. To me, this embodied ease with holding a different perspective is really the essence of demonstrating that you're engaged in evolution and this ability to take on an ever-increasing number of perspectives. And I actually think we have more to learn from the people we disagree with. Again, we don't have to agree. We just need to understand their perspective. But I think we have more to learn from people we disagree with than people we agree with. And, echo chambers are a real thing. So I know so many people that have gone down this rabbit hole. And what they don't realize, like, because I was unplugged from all of it for so long, I went back to some of the political blogs I read like 10 years ago, and I looked at them and I went, holy cow, like, what has happened here? They just like sucked all the weird conspiracy theories off of Twitter, started, blogging about them. And my friends who stayed in that and kept reading it every day, that I think of them as the frog in the frying pan that didn't realize it was getting heated up. And of course, it's all hypnosis. So they're getting tranced out by this stuff. They're reading this stuff. And so but this inside outside thing, and now suddenly, what we needed to do is see what conservatives said 5 years ago, or 4 years ago, like, elections matter. We won, get over it. Oh, so like your feelings don't matter, blah, blah, blah. And then they lose, and Trump tweeting out that Hillary's being a very sore loser. It's almost hilariously pathetic that these same people, either they have a very short memory, or they're being disingenuous, or they are just fundamentally dumb as rocks. And it's probably some combination, but come on, man. Like, at least admit that you made a mistake. I didn't vote for anybody in 2016, but there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I wanted to vote in a disruptor, and God, I didn't realize what I was doing. And sure, I get it. You still didn't want Biden. That's fine. I don't care. I fundamentally don't care. But this is the first time in my 50 years that I was actually concerned for the Republic. Usually I'm like, the Republic will be fine. We'll have a smooth transition of power no matter what happens. All that. So, oh man, the social media thing is a real problem though. If you haven't watched The Social Dilemma, I encourage you to. It's a documentary with a lot of people who they helped build the platforms, and they're deeply concerned about them. But those two facts that fake news spreads 6 times faster on Twitter, in particular, and they have the studies and the algorithms to prove it, than they do elsewhere. Or than normal, like verified and actual news does. It should be frightening to all of us. And it takes 15 seconds to fact check it. Do a Google search on the thing. It's a quick Google search. But just stop spreading Twitter. But also, the second thing was, they talked about how easy it is with an ad campaign on Facebook, essentially to sway an election in the previous few days before the election using Facebook ads. I mean, it was sobering, I should say. Anyway, the nature of evolution is to be able to take on an ever-increasing number of perspectives. And what that means is when you get new information, you should be able to either fit it into your worldview. If you can't do that, and maybe you reject it for logical reasons, though I have to say my confidence in people's basic critical thinking skills has definitely been shaken in the last 6 months. But either you reject it because it just doesn't, but be very cautious about your confirmation bias. Like the evolutionary looks for evidence contrary to what they consider to be fixed beliefs. Contrary, not for confirmation. So stop looking for evidence that you're right. Start looking for where you may be wrong, so that you build the elasticity in your perspectives. And by your very nature, you'll evolve, you'll deepen it, you'll get more spacious, you'll be able to hold perspectives, you'll be able to have better conversations with people, especially the people you disagree with. You'll at least be able to entertain their perspective, even if in the end you reject it because it doesn't fit for whatever reason, or it's not something you want to entertain. I'm waiting for any one of my conservative friends to say they were just like, they loved the idea of electing an outsider. But supporting him a second time, given all the lies he told, is a dangerous thing for the Republic. I don't believe in a post-truth world, which I think is a phrase that was popular a few years ago. There will never be a post-truth world. There will only be post-truth delusions, but there's never a post-truth reality. All right, this was an unscheduled thing. I didn't plan on doing this. And again, I don't like talking about politics, but I felt like today maybe I should, but I wrapped it into evolution. So expansion, contraction, plateau, those are all part of it. Be well, be in evolution.